Hello and welcome, guys, and welcome to this session. And yes, in this session, we are going to understand the amendments which have been brought by Finance Act 2021. And yes, these amendments are applicable to June 22 attempt of CMA Intermediate as well as CMA Final, and December 22 attempt for CMA Intermediate as well as CMA Final students. So I'm discussing the amendments which have been carried out in both the courses together. The amendments which are there specifically for CMA Final, I will mark them out, and CMA Intermediate students might skip those amendments, and for CMA Final students, all the amendments are relevant. So yes, guys, my review about Finance Act 2021 would be that there are not many amendments, and specifically from CMA students' perspective, from your exam standpoint, there are not many amendments. The number of amendments are few, but they are grave, they are intimidating, they are in-depth, which means that you require an in-depth analysis, you require an understanding of the change in law, because there has been some radical changes in law. So for example, section 147 reassessment proceedings has been revamped completely. So it's not that that is a very lengthy amendment, or it is an amendment which contains a lot of provisions, but there is a complete revamping, there is a complete restructuring of that particular section. So you would require an in-depth analysis of that particular amendment. Similarly, there has been a major amendment in capital gains chapter, section 45 subsection 4, read with section 9 capital B. This has been a landmark change. This has been a major change in capital gains chapter. Again, it's more relevant to CMA final students, more effective for their examination, more useful for their examination. But yes, for CMA intermediate students as well, section 45(4) is important. So the point I'm trying to make is that the amendments are few, but they are so in-depth, they are so grave that your understanding, your complete knowledge testing, and your in-depth analysis is required in understanding all these amendments which have been carried on by Finance Act 2021. So the assessment year which will be applicable to June 2022 and December 2022 students will be assessment year 22-23, financial year 21-22. That is the year which will be relevant for all of us for our examination for June 22 and December 22 attempt. Finance Act 2021. Alright, so let's start the amendments, and I'll start with the amendment in the PGBP chapter first. So let's start with the amendment in PGBP chapter and then we'll move on. Okay, sir. So, direct tax amendment in Finance Act 2020-21. So we'll be dealing with these amendments, and let me change the color of my pen so that you're able to understand the markings well. Finance Act 2020-21, which means assessment year 2022-23. This is the relevant assessment year which is applicable on these two attempts, guys, June 2022 attempt and December 2022 attempt. Now this particular PDF, I've also saved this PDF in a Google Drive. The link is given in the description box below, and over there you will find this PDF. So just download it, take a print out, and you can use it with your old books, with your earlier books, and that will suffice. Okay, these amendments are relevant for CMA intermediate and CMA final students. Of course, the study mat, the provisions which are there in the study mat of the Institute of Cost Accountants of India, all those provisions have been taken good care in this particular document, and all those provisions, whatever amendments are there in those provisions, have been taken into account. So let us start first of all with PGBP section. PGBP section, PGBP head, and the section which I am referring to is section 44AB, which is the section on tax audit. Now, tax audit section is divided into two parts: tax audit applicable for businesses, tax audit applicable for profession. Okay, business and profession. What I am referring to over here is the tax office, which is the tax audit which is applicable to business. Tax audit which is applicable to business, not profession. Okay, so there's an exception over there, guys, 44AB, where tax audit, the turnover limits which are there for conducting tax audit of businesses, the limit which is given in section 44AB is 1 crore rupees. So if your turnover is 1 crore rupees or above, then all the businesses are required to get their tax audit compliant, their tax audit done, right? Now, there is an exception to that section. This 1 crore limit had an exception. The exception was that if two conditions are satisfied, these two conditions are satisfied, then the turnover limit, which was 1 crore, would be enhanced to 5 crores. So if you are into business, right, and your turnover and you satisfy these two conditions. The two conditions are your cash receipts should be maximum of 5% of the total receipt, and your cash payments should be up to a maximum of 5% of the total payments, which means you are demotivated to use cash in your business, right? This is the section which will demotivate you to use cash in your business. So if you are fulfilling these two conditions, then you are eligible to take an additional benefit, and the benefit is that you are required to get your tax audit done only when your turnover exceeds 5 crore rupees. Instead of getting your tax audit done beyond 1 crore rupees, you will be given a benefit that you will not be required to get your tax audit done if your turnover is below 5 crore rupees. That was the exception to this particular rule. Now guys, this exception has undergone a change, and now the turnover limit which is applicable for the exceptional cases is 10 crores and not 5 crores. So further benefit has been given to those people who can ensure that, and of course I'm talking about businesses who can ensure that their receipts and payments in cash are lower than 5% of the total receipts and the total payments. If they can ensure these two facts, then guys, their turnover limit which will be seen for getting tax audit done will be 10 crore rupees. So the change in the exception is there. Main rule remains the same, guys. The main rule, the actual provision remains the same. The basic provision remains the same, but the exception changes. So from the turnover limit of 5 crores, the exception says that now the turnover limit of 10 crores will be applicable, which means up till 10 crores, you're not required to get your tax audit done if your receipts and payments are not in cash above the stipulated limit. 5% is the limit. So this is the first change that has been brought about in the PGBP chapter, PGBP head under section 44AB. Now, let me demonstrate to you this particular concept by way of a chart as well. And this chart will tell you the exact scenario, right? Now, we are focusing on section 44AB. 44AB, which is section on tax audit. We are focusing on that section, and typically people who are there in businesses, we are talking about businesses, guys, right? Not profession as of now. So in case of your business, if your cash receipts and cash payments are less than or equal to 5% of the total receipts and payments, then guys, you will be required to get your tax audit done only when your turnover limit exceeds 10 crore rupees. This 10 crore was earlier 5 crores. Next, section 44AD is applicable on you if you are giving your taxation in the presumptive taxation regime. Then 2 crores turnover limit is applicable to you for conducting tax audit. And if you're not falling under these two category and you are under the residuary category, then guys, the erstwhile limit of 1 crore is applicable to you. So 1 crore is the normal limit which is applicable to everyone, right? There are two exceptions to this 1 crore limit. The two exceptions are exception number 1, which is 10 crores is the turnover limit if your receipts and payments are below the stipulated percentage. And your limit is 2 crores if you are into business, which is specified under section 44AD, which is the presumptive taxation. For rest of the people, the limit is 1 crore rupees. So this is the entire section. This is the summary of entire section. The amendment has been brought about in exception number 2. This is the exception number 2, and the amendment has been brought about in exception number 2. That is the amendment. Okay, sir. We got it. Great. So let's move on to the next amendment. And the next amendment is 44AB is done, and the next amendment is in section 44ADA. Guys, section 44ADA, which is presumptive taxation regime in case of professions, right? Over there, guys, the old, so this column is for the old law, this column is for the new law, right? So the old law states that this section, the presumptive taxation regime, is applicable to all resident assessees. So earlier, the presumptive taxation regime for professionals was not limited to any particular specific resident, but it was applicable to all the residents. Now, under the amendment, guys, applicable to resident individuals and firms. So the presumptive taxation regime has been curtailed. Its scope has been limited to only two types of residents. First is the individual and second is the firm, excluding LLP. So excluding LLP means LLP is not considered as a part of this particular presumptive taxation regime. And the next amendment is with respect to capital gains, and yes, one of the most important and one of the most challenging amendments which has been brought about by Finance Act 2021. And guys, there is a complete revamp of how capital gain is to be computed in a case where member of a AOP BOI or partner of a partnership firm gets something from the AOP BOI or the partnership firm, which means on dissolution of the partnership firm or AOP BOI, member gets something in return, right? For foregoing its shares, for foregoing its stake in the partnership firm or AOP BOI, member gets something. So for example, there's a partnership firm containing three partners, A, B and C, right? Now suppose Mr. B wants to resign from the partnership firm. He wants to move out of the partnership firm. So he tells Mr. A and C that, look, Mr. A and C, you please give me my share of capital and my whatever I deserve from the partnership firm, and I want to move out. I don't want to be part of this partnership firm anymore. This is known as reconstitution of the partnership firm. And guys, if all the three partners want to dissolve the partnership, if all the three partners want to move out of the partnership, then that is known as dissolution of partnership. So in both of the situations, guys, when the member of AOP BOI or partner in a partnership firm gets some of their shares in either in form of money or in form of capital assets, then there is a capital gain implication in hands of the company. Now that capital gain implication which is there in hands of the company, erstwhile it was listed in section 45 subsection 4. Now there has been a major change in section 45 subsection 4. So what is the change? What is the new section which has been brought by the Finance Act 2021? We are going to discuss that in brief, guys. Okay, and let me promise you guys, for this particular session I'll be putting up a detailed video on this entire section and some examples also. A detailed video I'll be putting up on this YouTube channel itself in maybe next few weeks, right? All right, so let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, the new kid on the block, the new section which has been introduced by the Finance Act 2021. This is the new kid on the block, and yes, section 9, if you remember. Let us go back to the basics of Income Tax Act. Let us go back to our basic concepts. Section 9 is typically there for defining the income. What do you mean by income, right? Section 9 is typically the section which defines income. Income which deems to accrue or arise in India. It defines the income. It is the basic section which contains the meaning, the expanded meaning, the extended definition of income. So guys, there has been an addition to section 9b, and the erstwhile section 45.4, the old section 45.4 has been transformed into section 9b. So earlier, section 45.4 used to say transfer of capital assets by a firm AOP BOI to a partner member by way of distribution on its dissolution. So whenever there is a transfer of capital assets by a firm or AOP BOI to its partner by way of distribution of such capital assets, then this entire transaction is chargeable to capital gains, right? This was the erstwhile section 45 subsection 4. Now this section has been transformed into section 9b. The new section is section 9b. Now how does 9b read? Let's read that. Transfer of capital assets by a firm AOPBOI to a partner or member by way of its distribution on dissolution or reconstitution. So the only addition which is there in the erstwhile section is that now the section expressly states that this section is also applicable on reconstitution. However, the earlier section used to say that the section was applicable only and only on dissolution. But guys, despite of the fact that earlier the section was applicable only on dissolution, many courts in the country have expressly stated that this section was also applicable on reconstitution. So there were a differing view of certain high courts, but yes, the section was implied to be applicable on reconstitution as well. Now the section is amply clear. There is no ambiguity. There is no problem at all. Section 9b states that any transfer of capital assets, let me repeat, any transfer of capital assets from partnership firm to a partner in two events, event number 1 dissolution, event number 2 reconstitution, is eligible for capital gain taxation. Similarly, guys, this section also states that if there is any stock in trade, so since we are dealing with capital gains, I have not expressly written that portion over here, but this section also states that if you transfer any stock in trade to your member or your partner, if you transfer anything by way of stock in trade, then that is taxable under the head PGBP. So whatever you transfer to your partner, it will be taxable, right? This is what is the basic thrust of this section, section 9 B, capital B, section 9 capital B. So if you transfer stock in trade, it will be taxable as PGBP, and if you're transferring capital assets, then they will be taxable as capital gains. Now the question is, so how will these capital gains be computed? They'll be computed by using a simple formula. And guys, similar formula was there in old section 45(4) as well. There's not much tweaking which has been done in this particular formula. Formula is capital gain is equal to fair market value of the assets received by the partner or the member of the AOPBOI or the partnership firm minus cost of acquisition of the capital assets in hands of the partnership firm. Of course, index cost of acquisition or cost of acquisition as the case may be. So this is the formula which was there in erstwhile section 45(4), and now when the transformed section, section 9 capital B is there in the picture, guys, the same formula has been transported to section 9 capital B. So sir, do you mean to say that section 45(4) has been eradicated, has been omitted, has been deleted, and a new section has been introduced in its place? Guys, a new section has been introduced in its place, but section 45(4) has not been eradicated. Section 45(4) has taken a new form. It has been converted into a new section. So what is that new section? New section is this, section 45(4). So I have written over here the old provision not applicable. There was no old provision since this is a newly inserted section, because the old provision which was there in 45(4) has been transfused to 9b. So there is no old provision. I have written there is no old provision for this particular new concept which has been introduced by the Income Tax Act. And yes, this concept which has been introduced by the Income Tax Act, the tax gurus and tax consultants and tax experts of the entire country are actually struggling to clearly understand this particular concept, clearly understand the nature of this particular concept, because this concept has been introduced in the Income Tax Act for the very first time under section 45(4). So the old section 45(4) has been converted into section 9b, and the place of section 45(4) has been given to this new concept or this new thought process which has been introduced by the Income Tax Act very, very recently. So what is this thought process? The thought process is very simple, guys. Thought process is that a partnership firm transfers its assets to the partners. A partnership firm transfers its assets to the partners. So of course, capital gain arises. Why? Because the assets were, say, acquired at 10 lakh rupees. Now it has been transferred to the partner, and the partner and the firm has come to a conclusion that FMV of that particular asset is 25 lakh rupees. So there's a net 15 lakh rupees of benefit which has been given to the partners, right? Now this benefit of 15 lakh rupees which has been transferred to the partners. So partners are taking this particular asset at a fair market value of 25 lakhs. So in effect, the company which had purchased the asset on 10 lakh rupees, it is selling the asset in 25 lakh rupees, maybe to its partner, but that's okay, even if it is selling to its partner. So net there's a capital gain of 15 lakh rupees. This is the thought process, right? Now there's additional thought process to it. There's one more angle, there's one more way to look at this particular scenario. What is the one more which is there to look at this particular scenario? One more way is, okay, I agree, the fair market value of the asset is 25 lakh rupees. The fair market value of this asset is 25 lakh rupees. I agree with that. But one more thing needs to be considered. What is that one more thing, sir? One more thing is that, suppose the fair market value of this particular asset is 25 lakh rupees. I am giving away this asset to one of my partners who's leaving my partnership firm, who's going outside my partnership firm. He's leaving my partnership firm. So I need to consider one more thing, guys. What is that one more thing? That one more thing is that, what is that partner's capital account balance in the books of accounts? So suppose the capital account balance of that particular partner in the books of accounts is only and only 18 lakh rupees. Suppose the partner's capital account in the books of accounts is only and only 18 lakh rupees. Now guys, there is an element of capital gain over here as well. Yes, this is the second angle to it. There is an element of capital gain over here as well. This also leads to capital gain, because the liability of the partnership firm which was to be fulfilled was 18 lakh rupees. However, the partnership firm is actually benefiting the partners and it is giving away its assets worth rupees 25 lakhs at only and only 18 lakh rupees. So guys, 5 plus 2, 7 lakh rupees is the benefit which is being transferred to the partner. So this is the second angle to look at it. Okay. So first angle to look at it. Okay. I'm repeating the first angle to look at it. And the first angle is I'm putting in the exact number, guys. So the first angle to look at it was that fair market value of the asset is 25 lakh rupees, right? And the cost at which these assets were purchased by the company, by the partnership firm, was 10 lakh rupees. So yes, there is a capital gain worth rupees 15 lakhs. Yes, there's a capital gain over here. There's a capital gain element over here, because you are giving away your assets at 25 lakhs. However, you purchased it at 10 lakh rupees. So there's a capital gain of 15 lakh rupees to the partnership firm. So this is your capital gain number one. This is your capital gain number one, right? Your second capital gain which accrues from this particular transaction is that the FMV of the asset is 25 lakhs. However, the partner's capital account, the liability which partner had on the partnership firm, was only and only 18 lakh rupees. So, but the question is, why would a partnership firm, give any additional benefit to its partner? Guys, partnership firm is for partners only. So it will definitely give any additional benefit if the arrangement is so. It will give additional benefits to its partners, because partners, for partners benefit only, partnership firm is there, right? So you cannot question the adequacy of this transaction. So 25 lakh rupees FMV. Capital account of the partner to whom this 25 lakh rupees worth of asset is transferred, only and only 18 lakh rupees. So there's a benefit which is accruing in this particular transfer worth rupees 7 lakh rupees as well. This is capital gain number 2. This is capital gain number 2. So guys, these are the two capital gains. Capital gain number 1 is taxable under section 9B. Capital gain number 2 is taxable under section 45(4). These are the two capital gains which are taxable in case the assets are transferred from a partnership firm to the partners under two situations: dissolution or reconstitution, right? Now let us read this particular section also, guys. Transfer of money or capital asset by firm AOP BOI to a partner member by way of distribution on its reconstitution. So over here, the precise point to be noted is that, guys, in case of a dissolution, only section 9b is applicable. In case of reconstitution, section 45(4) as well as section 9b is applicable. So both the sections are applicable in case of reconstitution. So capital gain 1, capital gain tax, capital gain 2, both will be taxable, both will accrue in case of reconstitution only. So if you are falling under definition of dissolution, which means all your partners are going away, then 45(4) is not applicable to you. 45(4) is applicable only in case of reconstitution. Okay, sir, we got your point. So this section is applicable to dissolution as well as reconstitution. So this section is applicable only to reconstitution. Okay, sir. So capital gain 2 is applicable only on reconstitution. Okay, sir. Now how will the capital gain be calculated? Let's see that. Capital gain is equal to money received. So guys, sometimes what happens is, apart from giving a fair market value of asset or the asset, the firm can also give some amount of cash. Okay, so 25 worth of asset is given to the partner, plus 5 lakh rupees of cash is also given to the partner. Sometimes this may also happen. So we have been given the formula as money received by the partner plus fair market value of the assets received by the partner minus partner's capital account at the time of reconstitution. Partner's capital account at the time of reconstitution. So this is how the capital gain will be taxed in case of capital gain 2. Instead of reducing the cost, we'll reduce the capital account over here. But mind it, this is a very important point. 45(4) is applicable only and only on reconstitution. Section 9b is applicable on dissolution as well as reconstitution. Now you will be thinking about one thing, guys. I know this question is boggling you. This question is disturbing you. Sir, somewhere we feel that there is a double taxation happening. What? Where is double taxation happening? Guys, same 25 lakh figure is appearing over here and same 25 lakh figure is appearing over here. So on transfer of the same asset, the taxation is levied, the capital gain is levied under two sections. Capital gain is being accrued under two sections. On transfer of the same asset, I'm not talking about money as of now, guys, because in this section, money is not the consideration, money is not taxable at all. So money cannot be taxed twice for sure, because this section doesn't have money in it. 9b doesn't have money in it, okay? So I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about assets. When asset is transferred, specifically in case of reconstitution, when asset is transferred, at that point in time, guys, there is double taxation. There is double taxation. Same asset being taxed twice, once under section 9b, secondly under section 45(4), because 25 lakh is common in both the sections. So now the question is whether this arrangement would lead to double taxation of the same income. Is the intent of the section so that double taxation is resulted in hands of the company? Does this section mean this? Answer is no, because there has been a corresponding amendment in section 48 which states that section 48 actual cost, which states that the capital gain which is accruing under section 45(4), that capital gain can be taken as a credit while computing the actual cost of the assets of the remaining partners of the remaining partnership firm. So this capital gain which is being taxed currently, credit of this capital gain will be given in the future years to you. So there will be no double taxation. There will be no double taxation. But please remember that double taxation situation arises only in case of reconstitution. In case of dissolution, double taxation will not accrue because section 45(4) is not applicable on reconstitution. I've already told you the difference between reconstitution and dissolution in the beginning of this particular topic. So yes, a little bit, technical, complicated point, but yes, it's the point which has been introduced by Finance Act 2021, and rest assured I'll be giving you a detailed video on this particular section going forward in a few weeks from now. Alright, this is the chart where I'm depicting this entire scenario. Yes, looks complicated, but it's not that complicated as much you are thinking. No, it's not that complicated. It's pretty straightforward, guys, okay? Yes, sir. For you, everything is straightforward. Ask us, sir. We have 8 subjects to study. Nothing is straightforward for us. For you, everything is straightforward because you are teaching only 1 subject or 2 subjects or 3 subjects, sir. So everything is easy for you. No, guys, nothing of that sort. Okay. So we are now going to study a brief diagram, a pictorial representation of transfer of capital assets, capital assets or money by firm AOP BOI to partners or member on dissolution or reconstitution, section 9B and section 45(4). We are going to study that, okay? So 2 situations are there, guys. Reconstitution as well as dissolution. So I've already told you, no double disallowance in case of dissolution. On dissolution, section 45(4) is not applicable on dissolution. On dissolution, only section 9B is applicable. So we are safe with that respect. So dissolution would not result into double taxation at all because dissolution doesn't get covered under section 45(4). So what does dissolution mean? Dissolution mean that all the partners are out of the picture. So suppose if only the partnership form only contains of 2 partners, then if one partner resigns, then this is also a dissolution, right? If 3 partners are there and one resigns, then that is the case of reconstitution, right? But if there are 2 partners and one resigns, then that is the case of dissolution, right? Because firm doesn't exist anymore. So you need to take care of this fact that what is the question asking you to calculate? Is it asking you to calculate capital gains in case of dissolution, or it is asking you to calculate capital gain in case of reconstitution? That is what you need to understand. Okay, sir. So dissolution, section 9B we are referring to. Earlier the section which was there was old section 45(4), capital gain on transfer of capital assets to the members of partnership firm. FMV of capital assets minus actual cost of acquisition. That is the formula which we use in case of dissolution. Now we come on to reconstitution, where the major problem of double disallowance is there, double deduction, double taxation is there. This is the problematic area. So in case of reconstitution, capital gain on transfer of capital assets. So wherever capital assets is being transferred, in case of reconstitution, guys, the formula remains the same, FMV of capital assets minus cost of acquisition. Right. So in case of reconstitution, if the capital asset is being transferred, then the number 1 capital gain which is levied on this transaction is the capital gain on the transfer of capital asset, which will be calculated by FMV minus cost of acquisition. And the second tax, right, the second tax, which is actually section 45(4), the second tax which will be calculated in case of reconstitution is capital gain on transfer of capital assets or money. This is the second capital gain which will be calculated, and this is calculated basis the partner's capital account. This is section 45(4), and these 2 comprises of section 9B. So you can see an overlap in case of reconstitution. Guys, in case of reconstitution, there is an overlap, which means on reconstitution, 9B is also applicable and 45(4) is also applicable. In case of reconstitution, there is an overlap, right? If there's an overlap, then definitely there needs to be a resolution, there needs to be a credit. So the capital gain, which is there in section 45(4), that is eligible for credit under section 48. So you'll be given a credit of this particular capital gain, this capital gain, right? This capital gain, you will be given a credit of this capital gain under section 48, so that your transaction which is taxed under this and this head, that is not that doesn't lead to double taxation, and your reconstitution is freed from the shackles of double taxation. That is how section 45(4) reads. Okay, sir, we got it. So rest assured, guys, I'll be making a detailed video on this particular session, on this particular section, and I'll be floating the detailed video to you very soon. Okay, if you want to read, so I have given these end notes over here. If you want to read the revised section, you can do so by way of these end notes. I'll show you the end notes, guys. So after this particular chart, these are the end notes, right? These are the end notes. So here I have reproduced the entire section. So section 9B, I've reproduced the entire section, the text of the section. So you need not refer to any other document for your amendments. This document is a wholesome document, and beyond this document, you need not refer anything else, right? So this is section 9B, which has been reproduced. This is section 45(4), which has been reproduced. So both the sections have been reproduced for your ease over here, right? All right, sir, we got your point, and we now understood that although the amendments are less, but sir, they are hefty, which means they are little technical. So we need to really put our heart and soul to understand the Amendments, absolutely guys, absolutely correct. Now we come on to certain small aspects of your syllabus like return of income. Return of income section 139, it has got amendment in two subsections, 139.4 which is belated return and 139.5 which is revised return, right? These two sections have undergone a change. Now in case of belated return guys, earlier the time limit was the belated return may be filed before the end of the assessment year. Belated return could have been filed before the end of the assessment year. So suppose your financial year is 2021-22. So for this financial year, earlier the return could have been filed up to the end of the assessment year. Assessment year is 22-23. So ideally the return should have been filed by 31st March 2023. Right? This was the time limit. But now the time limit has been squeezed. Squeezed as in now the belated return may be filed before 3 months prior to the end of the assessment year. So now the revised limit is that not 31st March 2023, but the revised limit is that you have to file your belated return by 31st December 2022. So belated return may be filed before 3 months prior to the end of the assessment year or before the completion of the assessment. This is the change. Earlier it was end of the assessment year. Now it is 3 months before the end of the assessment year. So the time limit for filing the belated return and revised return have been squeezed, has been curtailed. Okay, sir. Similarly, for revised return guys, the revised return may be filed before the end of the assessment year or before the completion of assessment. Same time limit was there for the revised return as well. Now it has been squeezed to before 3 months prior to the end of the assessment year or before the completion of the assessment. So that is the change. Again, 3 months has been introduced. Earlier it was end of the assessment year. Okay, sir. Now we come on to assessment proceedings guys. The chapter of assessment proceedings has undergone small changes. Let's see what are the changes which are there. Okay, so this is a chapter which is important for both intermediate as well as final students. This chapter contains good weightage. It carries good weightage from an exam standpoint also guys. So questions, small questions, big questions from this chapter has been regularly asked both in CMA intermediate as well as CMA final. So this particular chapter has undergone certain changes. Let's see what are those changes. Section number 1, section 143.1, which is section for intimation. So once the return is filed with the income tax department, this is the responsibility of the income tax department to rectify the mistakes, rectify the errors, rectify some apparent mismatches in the return and issue an intimation to the assessee stating that this is your revised return. This is your return which according to us, after correcting the mathematical errors or some computational error, this is the return which is there according to us. So this is the intimation which is to be sent by the department to the assessee. Earlier, the time limit of this intimation was no intimation shall be sent after expiry of 1 year from the end of the financial year in which a return is made. So I'll give you an example. Suppose return is made on 31st of July 2021. Suppose return is made on this particular date. Guys, this is financial year 2021-22. This is the financial year in which the return is made. Now intimation is to be sent to the assessee by the department latest by 1 year from the end of the financial year in which return is made, which means the intimation was required to be sent by 31st March 2023 latest. Now this timeline has been curtailed. The new timeline is no intimation shall be sent after expiry of 9 months from the end of the financial year in which the return is made. The new timeline is not 1 year from the end of the financial year, but only 9 months from the end of the financial year. So if your financial year is 2021, it is ending on March 22, March 22, this financial year is ending. So I'll calculate 9 months, okay? April 22, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December 22. So your intimation should be sent to you latest by 31st December 2022. So again, the timeline has been curtailed. The timeline has been squeezed to speed up the work of the department so that the cases are heard and cases are finished off soon. the limit has been curtailed. Similarly, guys, 143, 144, the best judgment assessment, and 143, the normal scrutiny assessment, which is there. In both these cases, assessment order must be passed within 12 months from the end of the relevant assessment year. So the timeline which was given for the normal scrutiny assessment and best judgment assessment earlier was 12 months from the end of the relevant assessment year. The assessing officer had to pass the assessment order mandatorily. Confirmly, the tax officer had to pass the assessment order. Now the limit is assessment order must be passed within 9 months from the end of the relevant assessment year. Again, curtailment of limit. Limit has been curtailed. Limit has been squeezed. So lesser time given to the assessing officers now. And guys, let me tell you one very important fact. This is a trickle down effect. What do you mean by trickle down effect? Trickle down effect means if the return filing date has been, the intimation date has been preponed. Similarly, if you give lesser time to the department to file the intimation, if you save time under section 143(1), naturally you are going to save time on the assessment proceedings as well. Because if this is sent earlier, this is sent on time, then naturally assessing officer will have more time. So we'll give lesser time to the assessing officer to complete assessment also. So this is a trickle down effect. This amendment percolates to this amendment, right? This amendment results into this amendment. It's a trickle down effect. If intimation is issued on time, then naturally assessment will also finish on time. So these are all interrelated. These are all somewhere correlated with each other. And again, the revised return and belated return has also saved some time, guys. Over there also the limit has been preponed. So similarly, return date has been preponed, revised and belated. Intimation has been preponed. Assessment has been preponed. Everything has been preponed. It's a trickle down effect. That is how you can remember the sections and the amendments very well. Okay, sir, got it. All right, and now we come on to the giant. Again, I would say the new kid on the block, guys. The new kid on the block. The hot and sensational section, which has been absolutely revised and revamped by the Income Tax Act 1961, Finance Act 2021, amends this section 147, which is reassessment section, to a different level altogether, to a different section altogether. So now we are going to study the revamped section 147. And let me highlight over here, guys, this section is only and only important for CMA final students. So yes, CMA final students, in their syllabus 147 is there. For CMA intermediate students, this section is not there. CMA intermediate student need not study this section. This is not there in CMA intermediate study mat as of now. So CMA intermediate students, you need not study it. You can skip to the next part of the video. This is only and only relevant to CMA final students. All right. So the new kid on the block, the new section on the block, the new concept, the absolutely a new flavor given to reassessment proceedings. So section 147 relates to the reassessment proceedings. Reassessment proceedings. So guys, in the erstwhile section, in the old section, the requirement was that the assessing officer should have some reason to believe before it initiates reassessment proceeding. Now you all know already, because you've studied reassessment proceedings, you've already covered your, I'm assuming that you've already covered your syllabus for reassessment. Guys, reassessment means for one time assessment has already been carried out. The assessment is being now carried out again. Now, if you want to carry out the assessment again, there has to be some tangible material on your files, on the files of the assessing officer, which proves that there is a genuine case where assessment is to be carried on again. Guys, as assessment, assessment typically contains, utilizes a lot of resources of the income tax department. Okay. Now, if you tell me that the earlier assessment I have made, and that's okay, but I want to make reassessment, then I will ask you, why do you have to make reassessment? There has to be some reason. Why do you want to assess the assessee again? I will ask the assessing officer. So the earlier section 147 used to say that if the assessing officer has reasons to believe, if he has some tangible material on record which justifies, which proves, or which indicates that there is a income escaping, there is some income which has been escaped from assessment, then the assessing officer is eligible to again open the files and again open the case in case of the assessee. Now, the problem was in the erstwhile section, the problem was that yes, assessing officer has some material in his mind, has some material in his file which demonstrate that there is some income which has escaped assessment, but assessing officer is not 100% sure, right? Assessing officer is not 100% sure whether that that information actually leads to some income escaping or not. The only option with the assessing officer was to initiate the reassessment and carry on the reassessment again and carry on the again procedure again. But this doubt in minds of the assessing officer remained unresolved till the time assessment was carried out. And once assessment reopens, then the expenditure of the income tax department starts percolating as the manpower, the time which is spent by the assessing officer, it just flows in. So, to make this process very smooth, 147, 148 has been amended. What is the amendment which has been carried on? Let me show you a pictorial representation. Let me show you a pictorial representation. All right. So this is the pictorial representation of the new section. What changes have been made in the new section? This particular chart will tell you the amendments which have been made in the new section. All right. So, assessing officer has something in his mind which instigates him to carry on the assessment again. But that something in his mind is not absolutely sure. Assessing officer is not absolutely sure about what is there in his mind, right? So now the reassessment procedure under section 148 has been bifurcated into two stages. Section 148 reassessment has been bifurcated into two stages now. Stage number 1 is inquiry. Stage number 2 is assessment. So before carrying on the reassessment proceedings, the assessing officer is allowed to inquire about the thing which is there in his mind, the reason which he thinks is there in his mind, which instigates him to think that there is some income escaping in his part. This inquiry is to be done under the garb of section 148, capital A. The new section which is introduced for this particular inquiry is 148, capital A. So before 148 reassessment is carried on, the assessee or the assessing officer can carry out an inquiry under section 144A to ensure that the reason which the assessing officer has is actually leading to reassessment or not, is actually leading to income escaping or not. So an opportunity is given to the assessing officer to inquire the case before he starts the time-taking and costly procedure of reassessment proceedings. One opportunity is given to the assessing officer to inquire the entire case. What does it say? It says that scrutiny assessment under section 143.3 may or may not be concluded. So the inquiry can be conducted even if 143.3 is conducted or not conducted. Even if the scrutiny assessment is not there, then also reassessment can happen. This was there in the earlier section as well. So once I'm assuming that 143.3 has been conducted, the scrutiny assessment is over. New information indicates that income chargeable to tax had escaped in assessment. So there's some new information which indicates that the income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. So assessing officer is of some view or is of some information which states that the income chargeable to tax has escaped assessment. Then the assessing officer can issue a notice under section 148 capital A, which is inquiry notice. This is not reassessment notice, this is inquiry notice. Issued show cause notice under section 148A to conduct inquiry on the new information, right? The idea is not to reassess the entire books again. The idea is just to understand the new information, whether the new information is valid or not, right? Then an order is to be passed under section 148A, deciding whether it is a fit case for 148 or not. So after this inquiry, the assessing officer will pass a section 148A notice order, which will state whether the information which is there with the assessing officer is valid or not, and whether it leads to income escaping or not, and whether this income escaping assessment is required or not. And after giving a positive go ahead from this particular order, reassessment proceedings will start. So then the reassessment proceedings will start, guys. if the order is positive. If the order is negative, then reassessment proceedings will not start. So if the order is positive, then the assessing officer issues a notice under 148 along with 148A order. Inquiry order is positive, so the assessing officer will issue a 148 notice along with 148A notice requiring the assessee to file the return. Pass an order under 147 after conducting the reassessment proceedings. Then the final order will be passed, guys. The final order, which will contain the reassessment proceedings conclusion, will be passed by the assessing officer, and then new issues may be considered during the reassessment. Two important points which is to be noted in reassessment, guys, that it is not only the new information which was there with the assessing officer that only will result into income. If during the course of assessment proceeding, if there is some new issue which is found by the assessing officer, that can also be taken into consideration. Secondly, reassessment may not be done when assessment is pending. When the original assessment is pending, then naturally, guys, what is the need of reassessment if original assessment is pending? So that is how we are going to actually conduct the reassessment proceeding as per the new section, and this is the new section, guys. And again, I promise you that guys, in case in this particular case, I'm going to release a detailed video on reassessment proceedings, the revised reassessment proceedings, in a few weeks on this particular channel only. So stay tuned, and let's move on to the next amendment. Yes, sir. Okay, so 147, the difficult assessment is over now. Now we come on to the rest of the amendments. Okay. And again, let me reiterate, 147 amendment, 148 amendment is not applicable to the intermediate students. Intermediate students need not study this 147 amendment. Okay. Let me also show you one thing, guys, that just the end notes, after this particular chart, there are end notes where I have reproduced the section on income escaping assessment. The new section, section 147, has been reproduced. So you can read this particular section which has been introduced line by line, so that you are able to understand the gist of it in a very, very clear and precise manner. Okay, sir. Next amendment is, yes, income from other sources. This is the next amendment, which is income from other sources. So guys, in case of sale of immovable property, if the immovable property is transferred at an inadequate consideration, then guys, there used to be a income from other sources charge on the immovable property which is transferred for inadequate consideration. Over there, guys, the difference between the stamp duty value and the consideration, if it was higher than 50,000 or 10% of the, if it was higher than, okay, we need not read the first part. Okay, if the difference between the stamp duty value and the actual consideration was higher than rupees 50,000 or 10% of consideration, it was taxable as gift in the erstwhile section, in the old section, right? So if I am selling some property, immovable property, to a person, third person, and the SDV, the stamp duty value of that property, is 50 lakh rupees, I am transferring it for only 20 lakh rupees, then guys, the balance 30 lakh rupees will be taxable in hands of the other person as gift. This was the gift tax regime which was there under section 56(2)(10) in the erstwhile section. Now this erstwhile section, where this particular tolerance limit was there. So if the difference between SDV and actual consideration is 50,000 or 10% of the actual consideration, then it was okay. Only when the difference exceeds rupees 50,000 or 10% of the consideration, only when gift tax used to percolate, right? Now in the new section, this particular part, up till this part, it is exactly the same. However, there is one more addition to this particular part, which says that the tolerance limit, what is tolerance limit? Guys, the tolerance limit is this 10%. If the difference between SDV and the actual consideration is 10% of the actual consideration, then we will not tax this particular transaction as gift tax, right? We will not tax it. This is the tolerance limit, right? Now, this tolerance limit, this 10% is the tolerance limit. The tolerance limit is increased to 20%. Oh, additional benefit is given to certain category of assessees. Additional benefit is given to certain category of assessees. What is the additional benefit? Tolerance limit is increased to 20% in case of transfer of a residential unit. Okay, so if you're transferring a residential unit, Like immovable property is the core of the section, but out of immovable property, if you are specifically transferring a residential unit, right? First time allotment. Now this transfer shouldn't be a subsequent sale. It should be a first time allotment, which means a builder is transferring the residential unit to a buyer. First time allotment. During 12th November 2020 to 30th June 2021, the consideration of which is up to 2 crore rupees. So guys, three conditions need to be satisfied. Condition number one, it should be a residential unit. This is condition number one. Condition number two, it should be transferred during a residential unit which is first time allotment. So there are two conditions which are attached. Residential unit which is first time allotted. Second condition is it should be transferred during this period 12 November 2020 to 30th June 2021. Third, the consideration should not be more than 2 crore rupees. If these three conditions are cumulatively satisfied, then the tolerance limit will be increased to 20% instead of 10%. Guys, let me tell you one very important thing. This is the era when the corona pandemic, the corona massacre was at its peak. 2020 was the black year in the economy, in the world, in the calendar of the world. 2020 was the black year where corona was spread for the first time. So the builders were struggling to sell off their inventory. Builders had inventory of residential units. They were struggling to sell off their residential units. They were struggling to sell off their inventory because no one was actually purchasing new property during that time. So to give some benefit to those builders, to those people who were having inventory of residential units, this section was introduced, and therefore the period was 12th November to 30th June 2021. The period which is decided is this particular period. That is the reason. So to give benefit to those people, those builders who have had an inventory of new residential units, to give benefit to those builders, this particular section was introduced. So thus the above portion remains the same. So this and this is absolutely the same. The difference is in this particular part. This particular part has been additionally introduced. If during this period the residential unit is transferred, then the tolerance limit is 20% instead of 10%. That is the additional amendment. Okay, sir, we got it. Let's move on to the next amendment. And yes, the next amendment is with respect to deductions. Okay, guys, a very small amendment. So deduction under section 80 IAB, which is available for the projects which have been approved by competent authority after 1st June 2016 but on or before 31st March 2021. So this benefit was granted up till the projects which were approved up till 31st March 2021. The deduction was not applicable beyond this particular period. The projects which are approved beyond this period, now this deduction has been enhanced. This has been extended to 31st March 2022. So now this particular deduction is applicable up till the projects which are approved up till 31st March 2022. So the benefit has been extended up till the period 31st March 2022. That is how the deduction under section 80 IAB has been extended. So from 31st March 2021, it has been extended to 31st March 2022. That is the amendment. All right. Again, guys, new kid on the block. And this time two new kids on the block. There are a lot of new kids on the block, right? Lesser of amendments, but more of some new fresh faces, some young blood coming in, some new sections being percolated in the old Income Tax Act. So yes, two sections of TDS has been introduced, guys. Tax deducted at source. Two new sections have been introduced. Very, very important amendments, especially 194Q, very, very important amendment. Again, I've given the bare section, the detailed section as an end note to this particular chart. Section 194P, again an important section, was not there in the old law. Was not there in the old law. This is a new introduction in the Act, right? Now, I'll tell you what is 194P. Guys, 194P is applicable on pension income. Now you'll ask me, sir, pension income? Sir, pension is salary. If pension is salary, then pension is already covered under section 192. Then sir, what's the use of 194P? So pension is salary, right? Right, pension is salary. So salary is already covered under section 192. So guys, what is the need for introducing a new section, a new TDS section for pension? Because pension is already covered under salary. Guys, the need for introducing this section is to give benefit to some pensioners. To some pensioners whose age is above 75 years, to give benefit to those pensioners, this section has been introduced. Sir, how can a TDS section give benefit? You know, TDS section is for deducting tax, right? How can a TDS section give benefit? Guys, this TDS section is a unique TDS section. And yes, this section will give a benefit. Sir, what is that benefit? Benefit is that if you are a pensioner and your age is above 75 years and you get your TDS deducted under this section, not under 192. If you get your TDS deducted under this section and not under 192, then guys, you are not required to file your income tax return under section 139(1). You are not required to file your income tax return. This is the big benefit which is given to you under this section. So sir, obviously we will always prefer, if we are above 75 years of age, we will always prefer to get ourselves our TDS deducted under this section. Why would we go to 192? Guys, this section has got some conditions. Only if you fulfill those conditions, you will be eligible to get yourself to get your TDS deducted under this section. If you fulfill those conditions, right? So those conditions are stringent conditions. Those conditions are strict conditions. But if you once you fulfill those conditions, then you will get an amazing benefit that you won't be required to file your return of income. You will not file ROI to Government of India. That is a big compliance, big headache, guys, which you are absolved of. Now let us see what is the section. So the next section says that any person, that is a bank, responsible for paying pension to a resident individual. So the section is applicable to resident individual, aged 75 years or more. The age of the resident individual is 75 years or more, shall deduct tax at the slab rate. So the bank, guys, we are now referring to the bank. So there's a bank who's giving pension to whom? To a senior citizen. This is a senior citizen, and since he's a senior citizen, there has to be some gray matter which represents the, yes, some gray matter, some hair should be gray, right? Because he's a senior citizen, he's an old man, so there has to be some gray matter on his body. So this is a senior citizen, and bank is paying pension to the senior citizen, right? Bank is paying pension to the senior citizen. Now, while paying the pension to the senior citizen, if the bank deducts tax at slab rate after giving effect to Chapter 6A deduction and rebate under Section 87A, if while making the payment, the TDS is deducted after considering Chapter 6A deduction, guys. So guys, what happens generally is many employers, while deducting TDS, they ignore Chapter 6A deduction. They ignore the relief, the rebate which is to be received by the assessee, and they tell the assessee, look assessee, you claim this Chapter 6A deduction in your return of income. We are not giving you benefit of this deduction. So in my case also, it used to happen in my company, guys. 80G reduction I used to claim, and my company used to say, you please claim this 80G reduction in your return of income. We are not giving credit to you for 80G reduction. So in this particular case, you are not given an option. You are ordered to deduct the TDS at a slab rate after giving Chapter 6A deduction benefit and rebate benefit. Such person, that is the deductee, is not required to file the return of income under Section 139(1). So if bank is paying pension to this particular senior citizen, and there's one more condition, guys, which we'll read in this footnote, in this end note. The condition is that there should be no other income of this particular person. This person should not earn any other income apart from pension income or interest income which is received from the same bank. This is a precondition, that this particular old man, this particular old person should not have any other income apart from pension income and interest income from the same bank. In this situation, if bank is paying pension to this particular person and bank deducts tax at slab rate after giving the benefits, then this particular person is absolved of, is not required to file the return of income under section 139(1). A big relief, a big compliance relief which is given by this particular section, a big relief in the compliance. Okay, sir. So guys, I would definitely urge you to read the section carefully. The section is written in the end note number 5. So read that end note very, very carefully. The section is very, very important to be read by you. Okay, sir. Now I move on to the next section. Next section is 194Q. Now, greed is never ending. Your greed can never end, right? And if something is benefiting you, then your greed is to a next level. If something is useful to you, then the willingness or the want of extending it to a very large extent is really, really powerful. This particular feeling has been percolated in this particular section 194Q. After looking at the huge success of tax deduction at source sections in India, withholding tax sections in India, after looking at the huge success of these sections whereby the income tax officers, in effect the income tax department, is transferring its own liability of collecting taxes to the deductor, to the person who's paying the income. The liability is of the income tax department of collecting taxes, but the liability is being transferred to the employer or to the person who's paying the income. The liability is transferred to them. So this is a delegation of responsibility which is done by income tax department to the employer. If there's an employer-employee relationship, employer is required to deduct tax on salary, right? There's a delegation, right? So this entire process of delegating responsibility of the income tax department to the employer was widely successful, right? When it was so successful, then, erstwhile the sections were restricted to services, salary, contract, right? Professional payment 194J, 192 salary, 194C contract, brokerage, commission H. Right, so 194 was the basic section, and it was targeted to certain services, certain things which are not product. Okay, earlier the TDS section were not applicable on sale and purchase of products as such, but now, after looking at the huge success of TDS provisions and after seeing the benefits of TDS provisions, welcome aboard, the new kid on the block. The TDS sections have been applicable, have been applied to products as well. Yes, the section introduced now under Finance Act 2021 applies TDS provisions on selling and purchase of products, goods as well, which was not there in the erstwhile regime. The section says any person that is the buyer. Now this section is applicable on buying and selling. Buyer having turnover of previous year above rupees 10 crores who purchases goods except for securities and commodities from recognized stock exchange. RSE means recognized stock exchange. So this section is not applicable on commodities, securities, shares, debentures, etc. Apart from shares, debentures, commodities, this section is applicable to all other walks of purchases worth more than rupees 50 lakhs from a resident person, that is the seller, is required to deduct TDS at the rate of 0.1% of the sum in excess of rupees 50 lakhs. So yes, if your purchase value of your goods exceeds rupees 50 lakhs, if the purchase value of your goods exceeds rupees 50 lakhs and you are a buyer and your turnover is 10 crores or more, you are required to deduct TDS on such purchases. While making the payment to the seller, suppose you are purchasing raw material. While making the payment to the seller, you have to deduct TDS at the rate of 0.1%. Yes, the new kid on the block, the new section on the block, guys. After the huge success, the thundering, the roaring success of TDS sections in service sector, now it has been introduced in goods as well. But yes, good for the economy, good for the income tax department, good for government of India, because by doing this, information of many people will reach to the income tax department, the work that they are doing, the kind of tax planning which they are doing, the kind of evasion which they are doing. It will all be highlighted in case of selling and buying as well after the advent of this particular section. So very powerful section. And yes, please read the blueprint of this section in end note number 6, which is given at the end of this particular table. So please read that end note for sure. And yes, guys, for all these section, my commitment to you that whichever section is the detailed section, I'll be making a separate video for each of the sections, and I'll be putting it on this YouTube channel very, very soon, so that you're able to understand all these sections in great detail, right? All right. Okay, guys, two new sections which have been introduced in the TDS and TCS regime. So this is for TDS and 206AA is for TCS. A very simple section, a compliance related section, guys. So this section was not there earlier. Now this section is there. Now the basic purpose is that we need to ensure that people who are deducting TDS, they should have PAN numbers, right? For the people to have PAN numbers, guys, 206AA section, which was there earlier as well, right? It is there now also, it was there earlier also. So guys, under section 206AA, the penalty was levied if you do not furnish your PAN, right? If the deductor is not given PAN, then deductor is instructed that you please deduct tax at a higher rate of 20%, right? Do not leave those people who do not have PAN. Right? This was section 206AA. Now, this particular section has been further, it has been made more stringent. It has been made more strict by introduction of section 206AB. So 206AA had the requirement of PAN. I'll give you an example, okay? Reliance Industries Limited. I am working in Reliance Industries Limited. I am an employee of Reliance Industries Limited. I am the CFO of Reliance Industries Limited. There's no harm in saying and assuming, guys. Don't laugh at me, please. You're laughing. Why are you laughing? Please don't laugh at me. I am the CFO of Reliance Industries Limited. Reliance Industries Limited pays me a salary of 5 crore rupees per annum. Deducts TDS from my salary. While paying salary to me, deducts TDS. I do not furnish my PAN to Reliance Industries Limited. As a result, 206AA will be evoked and Reliance Industries Limited will deduct the TDS at a higher rate instead of the rate which is applicable to me. This is punishment for me. A punishment for me for not producing PAN. Now, there is a more stringent section introduced, 206AB. Now onwards, Finance Act 2021 onwards, now onwards, Reliance Industries Limited will not only ask for my PAN, of course the PAN is required. It will not only ask for my PAN, but it will also ask for my return of income of past 2 years. Return of income of past 2 years. Now Reliance Industries Limited is required to get two things. One, my PAN. If it doesn't get my PAN, then it will penalize me under section 206AA. In addition to that, Reliance Industries Limited will also ask me for my return of income, for Nikhil Gupta's return of income for past 2 years, to ensure that Nikhil Gupta has filed his return of income. And if he has not filed his return of income, then he has valid reason for not filing the return of income. Let's read the section. It says that in case the payee is Nikhil Gupta. Nikhil Gupta is the payee. I am the employee. I am receiving the salary. In case the payee has not filed the return of income under section 139(1) for last 2 previous years and TDS is deducted and collected from such payee is more than 50,000, then TDS or TCS shall be deducted or collected in the current previous year at the higher of the following rates: twice the applicable rate or 5%. So if I do not furnish my return of income for last 2 years and my TDS which is deducted in the current year is more than 50,000 rupees, and if I have not filed my return of income for last 2 years, then guys, I will be penalized. I will be deducted, I will be eligible to tax, I will be eligible to TDS for twice the rate of my actual TDS rate or 5%, whichever is higher. Now guys, I clearly see a connect between this section and the earlier section. What is the earlier section? Earlier section is section on the sale of goods. I can clearly see a connection over here. What is the connection, sir? I'll explain you the connection, okay? So, people who are selling goods are covered under this particular section 194Q, right? This is the section which has been introduced by the Finance Act now. More often than not, the people who are regular defaulters in case of taxation, they would definitely be defaulters in case of return of income as well. So people who are purchasing goods and services, typically the unorganized sector, the sector where the organization is not there. So for example, some raw products are sold, some raw things are sold, raw material is sold, plastic is sold, wood is sold. In unorganized sector, there will be many people who will not be filing their return of income. They will not be filing their return of income. There will be many people in this particular arena, right, for last 2 years as well. So by applying this section, they will be required to deduct TDS for the current previous year, and by applying this section, the income tax department will get a detail of these defaulters for the last 2 years. This is a double-edged sword. This is one sword which has two angles to it. I'll give you an example. Okay, so my name is Reliance Industries Limited, and I purchase goods from Dhruva Industries Limited. Dhruva Industries Limited is a regular income tax defaulter. He doesn't file his income tax return, he doesn't file his income tax, and he always try to curtail or evade taxes. Now, Reliance Industries Limited is purchasing goods from Dhruva and making payment to Dhruva. Earlier, when the product was not applicable on TDS, products were out of scope of TDS, Reliance didn't used to deduct TDS, but now Reliance has to deduct TDS on the payments made to Dhruva. So Government of India is getting information that Dhruva is selling goods to Reliance Industries Limited. Government of India is getting that information. Now, using this section, Reliance Industries Limited will not only deduct tax on the payments which are made to Dhruva, but it will also ask Dhruva to get their income tax returns of last 2 previous years to Reliance Industries Limited. Reliance Industries Limited will ask for 2 previous year returns from Dhruva. If Dhruva is unable to furnish the income tax returns for the last 2 years, then Reliance Industries Limited will increase the TDS rate to twice the TDS rate. This is how 3 years default will be highlighted in front of the income tax department. 3 years default of the same defaulter. So what I feel is, I can see a great connect in these two sections, guys. These two sections are somewhere connected with each other, and the idea of bringing these two sections together is very, very clear that, these two sections will complement and supplement each other. So a defaulter will be pulled out, will be pulled up by his collar, and it will be thrashed by the income tax department. So this section was not introduced earlier. It is now introduced. Now there's an exception to this particular section. The above section is not applicable in case of TDS deduction under section 192. So in case of salary, guys, if you're a salaried employee, then this section is not applicable on you. Naturally, guys, the employees are so many that if we take a note of return of each of the employee, it will be maddening for Reliance Industries Limited. Maddening. Right? So this section is not applicable on section 192. This section is not applicable on 192A, 194B, 194BB, 194LBC and 194N. So certain TDS deductions have been excluded from this particular section, so that it will not be a burdensome thing for the deductor. At the first instant, the income tax department is transferring its own burden to the deductor. Secondly, it cannot further add on to the adversities to the deductor, right? So this section of obtaining return of income of the deductee is not applicable on these particular TDS under section 192, 192A, B, BB, LBC and 194N. So you can take a note of it. And yes, of course, after that, guys, I've given this section also in detail, wide end note under end note number 7. You can read through the section very, very carefully. All right. So guys, yes, these were the amendments which were there in the Finance Act 2021, which have been percolated in your syllabus now, and these will form an essential ingredient of your June 2022 examination for CMA Intermediate and CMA Final. Please do these amendments well, because there's an old saying that about 10 to 15% of your examination will come from these amendments, the latest amendments. So yes, for these amendments, you should cover these thoroughly. The PDF of this particular document is saved in the Google Drive link, which is given in the description box. please go on the description box. Please download that detail, that PDF, and you can take a printout of that PDF and you can use it for your purposes. And yes, as committed, I will definitely try to deal with each of these sections in great details in my subsequent videos, which I'll be floating in this particular YouTube channel. So just wait and watch for those videos. You'll be getting those videos very soon, and I'm sure that I've discussed all these sections briefly over here as well, so you'll be able to get a fair idea of the amendments through this video as well. A little lengthy video, but yes, a worthwhile video, a video in which all the amendments have been discussed in detail for all of you, for the CMA, exclusively for the CMA intermediate and CMA final students. So yes, till we meet in our next videos with the detailed version of these amendments of these various sections, we'll meet in our subsequent videos. Till that time, all the very best and happy studying.